Probably one of the most fun sections of all of them to practice is reading comprehension. So that's what I'm going to do today. These questions are going to be of variable difficulty, some easier, some harder. But the passages are fairly long, so some people would find them quite intimidating. We are going to follow the 3 key strategies that I've outlined in my other reading comp videos, which is to read slowly with the aim being to understand what the author's trying to say. We're going to critically engage, meaning we're going to try and have fun with it, agree, disagree, etc. And thirdly, we're occasionally going to stop and summarize just so our brains can keep up with what's happening. Let's start that with this passage, and that's going to have 4 questions, and then we're going to do one other passage which has got 3 questions. I don't know any of the answers, so we're going to find out as we go along what is right and what is wrong. Okay, starting with this passage. The Opium Convention of 1912, a treaty was signed by China, Britain, and 10 other countries to stop opium use and trade, marked the start of the still ongoing international effort to control the consumption of addictive drugs through prohibition. Interesting, so 1912 is where it started. The idea that opium was dangerous to both individual and societal well-being was a consequence of the popular but erroneous perception, so it's popular but wrong perception, that unrestrained opium trade by Britain in the 19th century had reduced the once great Chinese civilization to an emaciated and hopeless population of opium addicts smoking themselves to death. Okay, so this idea is described as popular but erroneous. In other words, the author is saying people think this about what happened to China, but it's actually not true. It's an error. They didn't apparently do this. Interesting. Opium was the most effective painkiller known to mankind before the discovery of modern medicines. I didn't know that actually, and had been imported into China for this medicinal property since the 7th century. Wow, ages ago they were smoking opium. With their better means of production that resulted in higher yields, the British traders supplied much more opium to China than the country had before imported, thereby bringing the price of opium down to where even the poor Chinese could afford its regular consumption. Okay, so the British brought in a load of opium, and so the price went down so poor people could afford it. No wonder it got popular. This facilitated opium becoming a commonly used panacea, a cure for all problems. Good vocab word to note down. Against the symptoms of a wide number of ailments and diseases. Medicinal use of opium also increased concurrently at the same time in Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, and the drug remained popular till modern medicines became cheaply available in the 20th century. During the 19th century, the per capita consumption of opium was much greater in Britain than in China. This explains the error that we heard earlier. It's actually more popular in Britain than China. But the British users did not suffer adverse effects on either their health or longevity. Moreover, there is ample evidence that most users of opium, including the Chinese, used it in moderation and only occasionally, such as when in pain. So there wasn't this horrible problem that people believe. The implementation of the 1912 treaty in China led to the public humiliation and imprisonment of tens of thousands of ordinary opium users. That's terrible. As most of these users were already ill, some with contagious diseases, the crowded prison cells became the breeding grounds of epidemics and had high mortality, high death rate. Awful. Further, opium could now be obtained only in the black market. Scarcity, rareness, and illegality made it expensive. A search for cheaper alternatives led most opium users to morphine and heroin, psychoactive substances that were much more addictive and were deleterious to health, bad for health. The prohibition thus proved to be a cure that was worse than the disease. Such an interesting article there, I think, where they tried to stop the drugs in 1912, even though the problem wasn't as bad as people thought it was in China, but the cure, as in stopping the sale of opium, actually made the problem worse, led people to heroin, etc. Really interesting article, good to learn from. Okay, let's answer the questions now that we're really engaged slowly with the text. According to the passage, with which of the following statements are the countries trying to decrease the consumption of addictive drugs most likely to agree? Okay, so we're talking about those countries, China, Britain, and 10 other countries that did the prohibition. Which of these statements are they going to agree about? Interesting, I don't know. A, the best way to counter an increase in the consumption of addictive drugs is to stop trying to regulate. Not really, because they did try to regulate. They wouldn't agree with that. I mean, we might agree with A, but I don't think those countries trying to decrease the consumption would agree with that, because they did try to regulate their trade and use. They thought that would work. B, some addictive drugs are benign. No, we never talked about drugs being good in this passage. Public humiliation of the users of addictive drugs is a proven way to discourage other people from trying those drugs. I don't remember anything about humiliation. I know there was something here, public humiliation, but I don't remember ever them saying this is a proven way to work. D, eliminating the general availability of addictive drugs is an effective strategy to reduce their use. Yes, that's what they would believe in. That's why they try to prohibit and ban it. And E, making an addictive drug scarce and illegal paradoxically increases its national consumption. Yes, that's true. We know that's a fact, but those countries that tried to pass the law didn't know that. So D is the only one that fits, in my opinion. So to get the next question, I had to go back to the menu there, which is a bit annoying. But either way, we have the second question on this passage now. Select the sentence in the passage that indicates that opium trade by the British in the 19th century China benefited the non-wealthy Chinese. There was something about where they supplied lots of drugs and therefore reduced the price. I'm not looking at the answers. I'm just doing it from memory based on reading the passage slowly. It was something about the poor could afford it because of the low price. Where was that? It was around the beginning of the second paragraph. I think here, where it was like this with sentence. Yeah, the higher yields, they supplied more opium and thereby brought the price down. And just quickly double check the question. Select the sentence that indicates that opium trade benefited. Well, yes, it benefited in the sense that they could afford it. And we are talking about the trade. So that would be, but that's not one of the options. Definitely not A. Definitely not B. We're talking about the benefit. Okay, I guess C is decent as well because it helps against lots of ailments and diseases. So that is a direct benefit to the poor, that they could help with lots of different diseases having opium cheaply now. It wasn't the sentence I predicted, to be honest, but C does stand out as a good answer. Definitely not humiliation. We're trying to say why it's a benefit. And definitely not E, going to heroin. So this is just a question where they're testing if you listen to what they were asking. They were asking for how did it benefit the non-wealthy Chinese, which is C. I'll probably have to go back to the menu again. Oh no, I don't. Here we go. Question 3. Brilliant. Which of the following, if true, would most weaken the author's citation of British opium users? As an example, I remember they talked about British opium users having no bad effects. So anyway, which would most weaken the author's citation of opium users as having an example to suggest that opium probably did not adversely affect the health and longevity? So one of these things is going to show, we have to really, this is important to focus here. We really need to understand what they're asking. Too many students race on to try and get the answer right. And notice I'm not doing that. I'm reading and rereading the question to make sure it's clear in my head what I'm trying to answer. So I'm going to do that one last time. The author cited British opium users as an example to say that opium did not badly affect the health and longevity. But we need an answer that weakens that. So we need an answer here that says, you know, that example of the British people having good health from opium, that's a bad example, or it's not relevant to Chinese people. So one of the answers is going to do that. And now I'm clear what they're asking, I can actually try and answer. Per capita opium consumption of the British was less than some Middle East. No, we're not talking about Middle Eastern people here. B, the prevalence of ailments and diseases that required the use of painkiller was much higher in Britain than in China. Yeah, but that says that there'd be a good example to study in Britain with all their diseases they need to cure. We need to show that the example of the British people isn't useful or isn't fair. The bodies of the British and Chinese usually show similar responses. Again, we're trying to say why the British opium users are a bad example. So not C. This is really testing if you listen to the question. D. The other Asian countries in which the supply of opium increased in the 19th century through British opium trade resorted. Okay, no, because we're not talking about other Asian countries, we're talking about China. It's really important you eliminate answers that are out of scope, that focus on other things. That's a really important skill. E. Well, it has to be this, right? While the British opium users chewed opium, the Chinese opium users smoked opium, a method that had greater addiction potential and serious health effects. Brilliant. This perfectly shows and weakens that the British example is relevant to the Chinese. They smoke it in different ways, and therefore it's not as relevant. It weakens that author's citation of British users. So important to understand what they were asking here, because it was a complicated, long question. Here we go, fourth and final question on this passage. The author of the passage is primarily concerned with. Anytime the question is about what the author is primarily concerned with, we want a nice, vague, broad answer that encompasses all the paragraphs, not an answer that focuses on one example from one paragraph. So that's what I'm looking for, broad and vague answers. Explaining the problems in the first international attempt to control drug use. Yeah, that's pretty good, because we know the Convention of 1912 was the first time, wasn't it? Yeah, it marked the start of the international effort. So it was that, and A talks about some of the problems, B talks about the problems, I think. Talks about the problems of trying to control it, not the problems of the drug, the problems of trying to control it. And the third paragraph also talks about the problems. I'm liking A quite a lot, again, because it encompasses all three paragraphs, not just one little example. Clarifying a common misconception about the impact of prohibition. Even though that might be true, let's think about that. The idea that opium was dangerous to both individual and societal well-being was a consequence of the popular but erroneous perception. Yeah, that is the common misconception. But the common misconception was not about the prohibition, was it? The common misconception was about the Chinese civilization being brought down and being hopeless, smoking themselves to death. I don't know if the misconception was about the impact of prohibition on drug use. So B is tempting, but I think it's misleading. It's the wrong misconception, I think. We're going to find out the answers at the end. C, explaining how the British effort to eradicate opium triggered a worse crisis of addiction. Problem with C is the worst crisis of addiction is only right at the end of the third paragraph. I don't like that as an answer. D, discussing the factors that may decrease the effectiveness of prohibition. Not really. It's more specific to this convention and opium rather than the general factors about decreasing drug use in general. Notice that D is focusing on drugs in general and factors that affect prohibition, whereas I think this passage is specifically about opium here. Let me double check that. Discussing the factors that may decrease the effectiveness. No, I don't like D. It's hard to explain it fully. I just don't like D. You heard one of my reasons anyway. E, describing the consequences of a pandemic in opium addiction. No, it's the opposite. It's saying that was a misconception, that it wasn't that bad. So I'm going to go for A. I know a lot of you might be thinking B or possibly D. I will go with A because it's constantly talking about the problem of that attempt to control the use. It led to the price going up, lots and lots of things, I believe. Anyway, that's what I'll pick, and then we'll see what's right at the end. Okay, good job. You have answered this question 100% correctly. Okay, I'll just show explanation to you guys so you can see. This is question number, what question is this? That's question number 1 that I got right. Okay, so that's good. And this is the explanation, in case anyone wants to pause and read that. And number 2 was correct as well. Oh, you can see the percentages. So a lot of people got C right there as well. Question 3 was correct, but only 57% of people got that right. Did you get that right? And the last one was A. Look, only 30% of people got that right. So this was a really good passage to go through, because I think a lot of you would have been tempted by B, and it looks like C as well. And I hope I convinced you about why A is a better answer than C, because A was broader and C was focused only on the ending, which only appeared in one example in the 3rd paragraph. So it wasn't broad enough. So actually that was a great passage to go through. Luckily enough, I got all 4 right, and I hadn't seen these answers before. But that was so fun. I'm actually going to do one last passage here. And I'm going to try and bring that up. Here we go. And let's do this passage. It's only got 3 questions. Let's close my other windows. It's only got 3 questions, and we have a brand new passage here with, again, 3 paragraphs. So if it didn't go well with the last passage, do try to read along with me, answer along with me, and see if it goes better this time. We're going to use those exact same techniques, and they work even when the time pressure is on. Let's do it. Max Weber, don't know how to pronounce that, I think it's Weber, aimed to make sociology objective and systematic. Cool. Like the natural sciences, like physics. This was a challenge since historical and social reality, the subject matter of sociology, is inherently chaotic and dependent on individual, possibly idiosyncratic, unique, or irrational events, and on the subjective, opinion-based interpretations of those events by the contemporary and the subsequent societies and by historians and sociologists. That was a really long sentence. It's easy to get intimidated, but let's stop and summarize. So it was a challenge to make sociology objective and scientific because it's so dependent on individuals and how unique and irrational they are, and on opinion-based interpretations of events by society and by historians and sociologists. So it's really hard to make sociology objective and systematic. That's a key example of how I stop and summarize. The research and analysis methods of natural scientists would not have worked in sociology. Therefore, he created a conceptual tool called the pure type. Okay, so this is his attempts to make it like science using the pure type. I have no idea what that is, but we're going to find out, I'm sure. The pure type is formed by synthesizing, bringing together the characteristics and elements of many real-world manifestations of a particular phenomenon into a unified analytical construct that defines, this is so confusing. So we're mixing together, we're synthesizing the elements of different manifestations in the real world of a phenomenon into a unified analytical construct, whatever that is, that defines the general and logically consistent features of that phenomenon. Okay, that's incredibly confusing, but basically, apparently the pure type is bringing lots of things together so you can analyze it in a logically consistent way, I think. I don't know. For example, Weber studied capitalism and integrated the distinctive features of this economic system across cultures and time periods to create a pure type. Okay, I kind of get it a bit more now. So we're bringing together different examples of capitalism into a pure type, looking at all its distinctive features across time periods. According to this pure type, the attributes of capitalism are pursuit of profit as a sole objective, private ownership, number 2, of all the potential means of profit, competition between companies, number 3, and a laissez-faire, meaning let it happen, government that does not interfere with the free markets. Okay, so 4 aspects of the pure type of capitalism. Okay, a pure type is not meant to describe all the characteristics of any one instance of a phenomenon. Interesting. Moreover, no single instance fully follows to the pure type. Okay, so is it really useful, this pure type? The present-day United States is regarded as the most capitalist nation in world history. However, it too deviates significantly from Weber's pure type of capitalism. I wonder how. For example, are they going to tell me? The country has many markets that are dominated by a single large company. Oh, I see. So not competition between companies, I guess. And hence, are not competitive. Yes, exactly. So monopolies, really. The value of the pure type, here we go. What is the value? I don't think it's got any value, really, has it? The value of the pure type of capitalism is that it defines the features on which the economic systems of various countries may be objectively compared. Okay, so it's like a comparison tool, and on which the changes in the economic system of a country over time may be objectively measured. Okay, so it's a semi-objective, semi-scientific way to compare different features across time and comparing countries. Okay, sounds interesting. Anyway, let's answer the questions. In the context in which it appears, chaotic, sentence 2, where is that? Here, chaotic, most nearly means, well, a quick recap. He was trying to make it systematic, but it was a challenge since the subject matter is inherently chaotic and dependent on the individual. Circumstantial, not really the same thing. That means like random. It's not really saying that, it's saying dependent on the individual. Unplanned, yes, although we don't know it's unplanned. It doesn't say unplanned, it just says dependent on the individual. Puzzling, maybe, but there's no evidence that it's confusing. Maybe he understands it. Purposeless, without purpose. I don't think he ever says... It says it's challenging to interpret, but it never says there was no point to it. Unsystematic. I think that just because it says that Weber was trying to make it systematic, and this was a challenge since the subject matter is chaotic, which is presumably the opposite of systematic. I think, yeah, the other answers just don't seem that good. Now it brings me back here, so I'm going to have to go back to the menu to bring up the next question, as I had to do before. While the buttons are a bit unintuitive, I would say that the quality of the questions is quite high. So do check out the link in the description for where I'm getting these questions from. Manhattan Review. Anyway, next question. According to the passage, all of the following are true of the pure type as a conceptual tool except. So we're looking for one answer that is either definitely not true, or it could just be not discussed by the passage. Let me repeat that. 4 of the answers will be true based on the passage, and one answer will either be proven to be not true, or it could just be not mentioned at all in the passage, and therefore we can't say that it's true. So let's see if I can spot that one. We're talking about the pure type here. It represents the minimum requirements that a real-world case must satisfy to be considered a valid instance. That sounds true. It's like the basic characteristics. Yeah, I think that's true. It could possibly enable the objective measurement of changes. Yes, it mentioned being objective as an example, yes. C, it does not represent all observed features. Well, that was true. It said it directly. Notice how I'm not checking back too often with the passage because I remembered it because I read it quite slowly and clearly. D, it could possibly serve as a measuring rod to ascertain similarities and differences in contemporary real-world instances. Yeah, I think it said something about how you could compare different countries with it. So therefore, is it going to be E, the exception? It is usually not formed from purely abstract thought, but is based on analysis of real-world instances. So E is talking about how it is formed, but do we ever actually talk about how it was formed? Oh, there you go. Is formed by synthesizing the characteristics and elements of real-world manifestations. Actually, so E is proven, so I must have missed the right answer. Because it said it's real-world manifestations, so it's usually not formed by abstract thought. Okay, so E is true, therefore I missed the right answer. Can you guys help me out? Which one of these is not proven? Maybe... We do compare countries though. Where is it? Across cultures and time periods. Maybe the problem is with D that we're talking about contemporary real world. And maybe this requires like historical analysis. But that's kind of a weak answer. So I think D, but let's check the others. See if I can prove the others. It does not represent all the observed features. Yeah, it says that directly. Where is it? A pure type is not meant to describe all the characteristics. Yeah, so it's definitely not C. So I think D, but let's check B. It could possibly enable the objective measurement of changes. It said that something like countries may be objectively compared and on which the changes may be objectively measured. So E is proven and B is proven, so it's A or D. It represents the minimum requirements that a real-world case must satisfy to be considered a valid instance. Maybe it was that. Moreover, no single instance fully adheres to the pure type. So they're not a minimum. You can miss some of those elements. So actually it was A, because they're not minimum requirements. A country might not have all of them and you can still use it as an example. So actually I completely flubbed that one and it was A straight away, I think. Whew, okay, that wasn't great. It took too much time, but I got the answer in the end, I think. The author mentions the present-day United States, most probably in order to... I remember it was something like how even though the US is thought to be the most capitalist, it still doesn't have all the elements of the pure type. Like it doesn't have competition between companies in certain sectors. So I guess my prediction would be even the best example might not match the pure type. Okay, so let's check. Gives an example for the claim that a pure type does not describe all the characteristics of any one instance. Yes, well, that's true. It doesn't describe the US completely. But is that the reason why? Anyway, illustrate the process. No, we're not talking about constructing the pure type. B, refute the assumption that pure type facilitate an objective. No, we're talking about one example. D, support the claim that every instance of a pure type digresses from the pure type. Was the author claiming that every instance? No single instance fully adheres to the pure type. I guess that's exactly what D is saying. Support the claim that every single instance digresses, as in doesn't match the pure type, and the sentence is, moreover, no single instance fully adheres. So D is supported directly. What's the problem with A though? Gives an example for the claim that pure type does not describe all the characteristics. Actually, yeah, right at the beginning here, a pure type is not meant to describe all the characteristics. Oh my goodness, A and D are both proven. Although maybe it's more so D, because we are talking about the US digressing, because we're talking about the US not having competition between companies. So D is maybe better than A, even though A is also true, because D is more relevant, because we're talking about how the US digressed. So A is incredibly tempting, but the focus of A is saying that the pure type misses out on some things in the US, which is not quite true. It's more like the US misses on something from the pure type, which is the competition, which is D. So I'm going to go for D. Definitely not E though, because we're not talking about comparing it over time. So let's find out. That was really tough. I think a lot of people would get the last one wrong. Maybe I have as well. Anyway, 57% got E. So you can check your answers here as well. That was slightly easier, that one. This one was tough. Only 52% of people got that one. I took way too long probably on that one, but I got it in the end. And this one, look, 66% of people picked A and only 18% of people picked D, and D was correct. So I'm quite proud of that one. I've never seen these questions before. It was the part of the question where it said most probably. And a lot of people are going to be annoyed because the sentence started off with, is not meant to describe all the characteristics. And then the second sentence was, my one, the one for D. So how can we pick between the first sentence, which supports A, and the second sentence, which supports D? The issue with A was that the example of the US wasn't saying, oh look, the US has this thing that isn't in the pure type. It has this extra thing that wasn't described in the pure type. The example of the US was to say the US doesn't have this thing that is in the pure type. It digresses, it doesn't have that competition that the pure type does. So I thought D was better than A for that reason. Anyway, if you thought this kind of analysis was useful for any of the tests in which reading comp comes up, please do let me know in the comment section and I will make more of these type of videos. Have a great day.